Sarah's mother still remembers the last text message her daughter sent from the mountains. "Beautiful sunrise, Mom. Love you." 3 days later, when Sarah and Mike failed to return from their Rocky Mountain hiking trip, that message became evidence in a missing persons case. The young couple had walked into the wilderness and vanished completely. It took 12 years and a melting glacier to reveal their secret. When rescuers pulled Sarah's backpack from the ice, they found her diary inside, perfectly preserved, as if she had written in it yesterday. But when they read her final entry, dated 3 days after she was supposed to have died, everything they thought they knew changed. Sarah Martinez was 23 years old when she sent that final text message to her mother. She had been dating Mike Chen for 2 years, and they shared a passion for hiking and outdoor adventures. The couple had planned their Rocky Mountain trip for months, researching trails, checking weather forecasts, and preparing their gear with the careful attention of experienced hikers. On June 15, 2011, they drove from Denver to Rocky Mountain National Park. Sarah's last social media post showed her and Mike smiling at the trailhead, their backpacks loaded with supplies for what should have been a 3-day loop trail. They told their families they would be back by Monday evening, Tuesday morning at the latest. But Monday came and went. Then Tuesday. When Sarah's mother called the Park Service on Wednesday morning, rangers immediately began searching for the overdue hikers. The search team found their car first, still parked at the Bear Lake trailhead where they had left it 4 days earlier. Inside, they discovered Sarah's purse and Mike's wallet, along with extra clothes they hadn't needed for the trip. Everything looked normal, planned, intentional. But that was where the normal ended. The trail Sarah and Mike had chosen was well marked and frequently traveled. Other hikers had seen them on Saturday morning, heading toward the backcountry with confident steps and bright smiles. They seemed prepared, happy, and completely unaware that they were walking toward a mystery that would puzzle investigators for over a decade. Search teams scoured the mountains for 2 weeks. They used helicopters, search dogs, and dozens of volunteers. They checked every creek, every cliff, every possible place where 2 young hikers might have encountered trouble. They found nothing. No footprints beyond the first 2 miles of trail, no campfire remains, no torn clothing caught on branches. It was as if Sarah and Mike had simply vanished into thin air. The case grew cold quickly. Without any evidence of what had happened, investigators had nothing to follow. Sarah's mother, Maria Martinez, never stopped hoping. She organized search parties every summer, posted flyers throughout Colorado, and kept Sarah's case alive on social media. But as years passed, even the most optimistic investigators began to assume the worst. The mountains can be unforgiving. Flash floods can sweep away evidence. Wildlife can scatter remains. Cliffs can claim lives and hide bodies in places where humans never think to look. The most likely explanation was that Sarah and Mike had suffered some kind of accident, and their bodies had been consumed by the wilderness they loved so much. For 12 long years, that explanation seemed to be the only one that made sense. But the mountains had been keeping a secret. In July 2023, Park Ranger David Torres was conducting a routine glacier assessment in a remote section of the park. Climate change had been causing unprecedented ice melt throughout the Rockies, and Torres was documenting how quickly the glaciers were shrinking. That's when he saw it. A flash of blue fabric emerging from the ice near the bottom of Sapphire Glacier, about 8 miles from where Sarah and Mike had last been seen. Torres radioed for backup and carefully approached the object. As he got closer, he realized he was looking at a backpack, perfectly preserved in the ice, as if it had been frozen yesterday rather than sitting in a glacier for over a decade. The backpack was Sarah's. Her name was still clearly visible on the identification tag, and when Torres opened it, he found everything exactly as she had packed it 12 years earlier. Her clothes were folded neatly. Her camping gear was organized and clean. Her toiletries were sealed in plastic bags, completely untouched by time. But it was Sarah's diary that made Torres's hands shake as he pulled it from the bag. The leather journal had been protected by the waterproof compartment of her backpack, and the cold had preserved every page perfectly. Torres flipped through the entries, reading Sarah's thoughts about the trip, her excitement about exploring new trails, her love for Mike, and her gratitude for the beautiful weather. Then he reached the final entries, and his blood ran cold. Sarah's last diary entry was dated June 18th, 2011, 3 days after she and Mike were supposed to have returned home, and well after search teams had concluded they were likely dead. The entry was written in Sarah's distinctive handwriting, which investigators had studied extensively during the original missing persons case. There was no doubt it was authentic, but the content made no sense. Day 6 in the mountains, the entry read, "Mike found a way down to the glacier today. The ice caves are incredible, like nothing we've ever seen. We're going to explore them tomorrow before heading back to the car. The cold is intense down here, but it's the most beautiful place on Earth." Day 6. Sarah was supposed to have been home by day 3. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation community. Sarah's backpack was immediately sent to a forensics lab where experts confirmed what Torres had suspected. Every item in the bag had been perfectly preserved by the glacier ice. The diary entries were genuine, written in Sarah's hand with the same pen she had been carrying when she disappeared. But if Sarah and Mike had made it to the glacier, where were their bodies? And how had only Sarah's backpack ended up frozen in the ice? Detective Lisa Chen, no relation to Mike, had worked the original missing persons case 12 years earlier. She was close to retirement when Sarah's backpack was discovered, but she immediately volunteered to reopen the investigation. "In 25 years of police work, I've never seen anything like this," Chen told reporters. "We have physical evidence that Sarah and Mike were alive and moving through the mountains days after we thought they had died. But we still don't know what happened to them." The forensics team made even more disturbing discoveries as they examined the backpack. Sarah's camera was inside, and when they developed the film, they found photos that had never been seen before. The images showed Sarah and Mike exploring ice caves deep within the glacier, caves that weren't marked on any Park Service map. In the photos, the couple looked happy but tired. Sarah's face showed signs of cold exposure, and Mike appeared thinner than he had in pictures taken at the beginning of their trip. The timestamp on the camera confirmed the dates in Sarah's diary. These photos had been taken days after the couple was supposed to have returned home. But the most chilling discovery was in the final photo on the roll. The image was blurry, apparently taken in haste, but it clearly showed the entrance to an ice cave with something massive moving in the darkness beyond. Sarah had written on the back of the photo, "We're not alone down here." Detective Chen immediately organized a search of the glacier caves, using ground-penetrating radar and specialized ice climbing equipment. The team found the caves exactly where Sarah's photos had indicated, but they were mostly collapsed now. 12 years of ice movement had crushed the delicate formations that Sarah and Mike had explored. In one partially intact chamber, Searchers found evidence of a makeshift camp. There were the remains of a small fire, some food wrappers, and what appeared to be a makeshift shelter built from rocks and ice. But there were no signs of human remains, no clues about what had ultimately happened to the missing couple. The strangest discovery was a second backpack, Mike's, wedged deep in a crevice that seemed to have opened and closed as the glacier moved. Like Sarah's pack, Mike's belongings were perfectly preserved. His diary contained entries that matched Sarah's timeline, but his final entry was different. "Sarah's getting hypothermic," Mike had written on June 19th. "We need to get out of these caves, but the entrance we used is blocked now. The ice shifted overnight. Going to try the lower passage tomorrow. If we don't make it out, I want people to know we loved every minute of our life together." That was Mike's final entry, but it raised more questions than it answered. If both backpacks had been in the glacier, why was Mike's found in a completely different location from Sarah's? How had the couple survived in freezing caves for nearly a week with limited supplies? And what had Sarah meant when she wrote that they weren't alone in the caves? The investigation team brought in glaciologists to study ice movement patterns over the past 12 years. The experts confirmed that the glacier had shifted significantly, especially during warm summers when ice melt was most rapid. It was possible that the couple's belongings, and their bodies, had been moved miles from where they originally fell into the ice. But that explanation didn't account for everything the investigators had found. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a forensic anthropologist brought in to consult on the case, made a discovery that left everyone speechless. While examining Sarah's diary under high-powered magnification, she found something that the initial investigation had missed. Mixed in with Sarah's regular ink were traces of a different substance, something that appeared to be charcoal, as if Sarah had been forced to continue writing when her pen ran out of ink. This suggests that Sarah was trying to document something even when her normal writing materials failed, Dr. Rodriguez explained. She was desperate to record what was happening to them. The charcoal writing was faint, almost invisible to the naked eye, but it was there, scattered throughout the final diary entries like a hidden message. When investigators pieced together the charcoal markings, they spelled out coordinates. The coordinates led to a remote section of the glacier that hadn't been searched during the original investigation. It was an area considered too dangerous for inexperienced hikers, surrounded by unstable ice formations and hidden crevasses. A specialized rescue team rappelled into the area in September 2023, 15 months after Sarah's backpack had been discovered. What they found at the bottom of a deep ice crevice finally provided some answers, but created even more questions. Sarah and Mike's bodies were there, perfectly preserved by the constant sub-zero temperatures. They were found together, Mike's arms wrapped protectively around Sarah, as if he had been trying to keep her warm in their final moments. The medical examiner determined that both had died from hypothermia, probably within hours of Mike's last diary entry. There were no signs of trauma, no indication of foul play. They had simply been trapped in the ice caves by a glacier shift and had frozen to death before they could find a way out. But the location where their bodies were found was more than 3 miles from where their backpacks had been discovered. Glaciologists confirmed that normal ice movement couldn't account for such a distance. Something else had moved those packs, or someone. The case was officially closed in December 2023, with the deaths ruled accidental. Sarah and Mike had been adventurous hikers who had ventured too deep into dangerous glacier caves and had become trapped when the ice shifted. Their preservation in the glacier explained why their bodies and belongings had remained so well maintained over 12 years. But questions remain. park rangers have reported strange discoveries in the area where Sarah and Mike died. Other hikers have found personal belongings embedded in the ice, items that don't match any known missing persons cases. Some belongings appear to be decades old, suggesting that the glacier caves have claimed other victims over the years. Local mountain rescue teams now tell a different story about Sapphire Glacier. They warn hikers to stay away from the ice caves, not just because of the obvious dangers, but because of what they call glacier ghosts, the unexplained phenomena that seem to occur near the ice formations. Some rescuers report hearing voices echoing from deep within the glacier, voices that sound like people calling for help. Others have found camps that appear to have been abandoned recently, even in areas where no permits have been issued for camping. Dr. Rodriguez continues to study the physical evidence from Sarah and Mike's case. She believes there may be other victims preserved in the glacier, people who wandered into the ice caves over the years and never found their way out.
Glaciers are like time capsules, she explains. They preserve everything. Objects, bodies, evidence.
Sarah and Mike's case may have been solved, but I suspect their glacier is still holding secrets. Maria Martinez, Sarah's mother, finally has closure about her daughter's fate. She and Mike's family held a joint memorial service in the mountains where the couple had loved to hike. Both families take comfort in knowing that Sarah and Mike died together, doing what they loved. But Maria still has questions about the coordinates hidden in Sarah's diary, about how the backpacks ended up so far from the bodies, about what her daughter meant when she wrote that they weren't alone in the caves.
I'm grateful to know what happened to Sarah, Maria says, but I think there's more to this story than we'll ever understand.
The glacier caves where Sarah and Mike died are now permanently closed to the public. Park officials cite safety concerns, but some investigators believe there are other reasons for the closure. As climate change continues to melt glaciers throughout the Rocky Mountains, more discoveries are being made. Last summer, hikers found a tent embedded in ice that appears to be from the 1970s. A month later, rangers discovered what looked like a complete camp setup, frozen solid and perfectly preserved. Each discovery raises the same question: how many people have been claimed by these glacier caves over the decades? Sarah and Mike's story was supposed to end with their bodies being found. Instead, it opened up new mysteries about what lies hidden in the ice of the Rocky Mountains. The coordinates Sarah wrote in charcoal in her diary have never been fully explained. They led investigators to her body, but forensic analysis suggests the markings were made after her final regular ink entry, possibly after she had already begun showing signs of severe hypothermia. How do you write coordinates when you're dying of cold in a dark ice cave? How do you know exactly where you are when you're trapped underground in a glacier? Dr. Rodriguez believes Sarah may have found something in those caves, something that told her their exact location. But what that something was remains a mystery. The case files remain open for additional evidence, and the glacier continues to melt. Every summer brings new possibilities for discovery, new chances to uncover what really happened in the ice caves of Sapphire Glacier. Sarah's final text to her mother: "Beautiful sunrise, Mom. Love you," has become a reminder for hikers throughout Colorado. The message is printed on safety pamphlets distributed by the Park Service, along with warnings about the dangers of glacier exploration. But for those who knew Sarah and Mike, the message represents something more. The last normal moment before a young couple walked into a mystery that the mountains are still reluctant to fully reveal. The glacier keeps its secrets well. Even after giving up Sarah and Mike's bodies, Sapphire Glacier continues to hide the complete truth about what happened during those 6 days when 2 experienced hikers disappeared into the ice. And every year, as more ice melts and more objects emerge from the frozen depths, investigators wonder, what else is the glacier waiting to reveal? 3 months after Sarah and Mike's bodies were recovered, Dr. Rodriguez made a discovery that changed everything investigators thought they knew about the case. While conducting a final analysis of Sarah's diary, she found something that had been missed in the initial examination: microscopic ice crystals embedded between the pages. These weren't ordinary ice crystals. They contained traces of minerals that didn't match anything found in the surface areas of Sapphire Glacier. The mineral composition suggested the ice had formed in much deeper, older sections of the glacier, areas that had been frozen for potentially hundreds of years. This means Sarah and Mike didn't just fall into recently formed ice caves, Dr. Rodriguez explained to Detective Chen. They somehow accessed parts of the glacier that date back centuries, parts that should have been impossible for hikers to reach. The revelation prompted a new investigation, one that would uncover a pattern of disappearances stretching back decades. Detective Chen began reviewing cold cases from the Rocky Mountain region, focusing on missing persons reports from areas near Sapphire Glacier. What she found was disturbing. Since 1963, 17 people had vanished without a trace in the same general area where Sarah and Mike had disappeared. Most were experienced hikers or climbers. All had been well prepared for their trips. None had ever been found. The disappearances followed a strange pattern. They occurred roughly every 3 to 4 years, always during the summer months, always involving 1 to 3 people at a time. Local authorities had never connected the cases because they happened in different jurisdictions and were spread out over nearly 6 decades. But when Detective Chen mapped the disappearances, they formed a rough circle around Sapphire Glacier. Dr. Rodriguez began studying historical records of glacier activity in the region. What she discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. Sapphire Glacier wasn't behaving like other glaciers in the Rockies. While most glacial ice in the area had been steadily melting due to climate change, core samples from Sapphire Glacier showed periods of rapid freezing interspersed with normal melting patterns. It's almost like the glacier goes through cycles, Dr. Rodriguez noted. Periods where it aggressively captures and preserves organic material, followed by periods where it releases that material. The cycles coincided perfectly with the pattern of disappearances. In October 2023, park rangers made another discovery that sent investigators back to Sapphire Glacier. A hiker found a collection of personal items emerging from a melting ice field about 2 miles from where Sarah's backpack had been discovered. The items included a wallet belonging to David Prentice, who had disappeared in 1987, a camera that belonged to Maria Santos, missing since 1994, and most chillingly, a journal written by someone named Thomas Wright. Thomas Wright wasn't on any missing persons list. There was no record of him ever being reported missing. But his journal told the story of a man who had been trapped in glacier caves for weeks, possibly months, before freezing to death. The journal entries were dated inconsistently, as if Wright had lost track of time while trapped in the ice. Some entries described finding the belongings of other people who had been trapped in the caves before him. Others detailed his attempts to map the cave system and find a way out. Wright's final entries were the most disturbing. The ice moves at night. I can hear it shifting, rearranging itself. Sometimes I think it's trying to trap us on purpose. Found another camp today.
Looks like it's from the 1970s. The person who made it carved their name in the ice. Jennifer Chen, 1976. She wrote that the caves go deeper than anyone imagines. She was right. Jennifer Chen. Detective Chen felt her blood run cold when she read the name. Jennifer Chen had been her aunt, a geology student who had disappeared during a research trip to the Rockies in 1976. The family had assumed she died in an avalanche. Her body was never found. Detective Chen immediately requested permission to conduct a full-scale exploration of the Sapphire Glacier cave system. The Park Service was reluctant. The caves had been deemed too dangerous for civilian access. But the growing evidence of multiple victims trapped in the glacier system couldn't be ignored. In November 2023, a specialized team of ice rescue experts, glaciologists, and forensic investigators descended into the glacier caves using cutting-edge equipment. What they found inside challenged everything they thought they knew about glacier formation and behavior. The cave system was vast, much larger than any glacier cave system should have been able to maintain. The passages stretched for miles underground, connecting natural ice formations with what appeared to be artificially carved tunnels. Dr. Rodriguez was part of the exploration team, and her initial assessment was that the caves had been naturally formed by geothermal activity over centuries. But as the team went deeper, they found evidence that contradicted that theory. These passages show signs of deliberate construction, Dr. Rodriguez noted in her field reports. Someone or something carved these tunnels through solid ice, creating a network that shouldn't be able to exist in this type of glacier. The team found more personal belongings scattered throughout the cave system: backpacks, camping gear, clothes, and journals spanning 6 decades. Each discovery told the same story: experienced hikers and climbers who had somehow found their way into the cave system and become trapped when the ice shifted. But the most disturbing discovery was in the deepest section of the caves. The exploration team found a large chamber, roughly the size of a basketball court, carved from solid ice. The walls were covered with markings, names, dates, and messages carved by people who had been trapped in the caves over the years. The earliest marking was dated 1952. The most recent was from 2019, a message from someone named Alex Morrison, who wasn't on any missing persons lists. In the center of the chamber was what appeared to be a deliberate arrangement of personal belongings from various missing persons. Backpacks, sleeping bags, and camping equipment were arranged in a neat circle, as if someone had been collecting and organizing the possessions of people who died in the caves. Dr. Rodriguez called it a museum of the lost. But who had created this museum, and why? The investigation team spent weeks mapping the cave system and documenting the evidence they found. The pattern that emerged was clear. The glacier caves had been claiming victims for over 70 years, trapping them in an underground maze where escape was virtually impossible. But there were signs that some people had survived in the caves for extended periods. Several of the journals found in the caves contained entries spanning weeks or even months. Some described finding food sources in the caves: underground streams with fish, edible ice formations, even evidence of small animal life that had somehow adapted to the frozen environment. The longest survival story came from the journal of Patricia Mills, who had apparently lived in the caves for nearly 4 months before dying of exposure in 1982. Her entries described encounters with other survivors, people who had been trapped in the caves for even longer periods. "There are others down here," Mills had written. people who've been living in the deep caves for years. They've learned to survive on almost nothing. They don't talk much anymore, but they help newcomers when they can. The idea that people might have been living long-term in the glacier caves led to a chilling realization. The Museum of Personal Belongings wasn't created by someone who died in the caves. It was maintained by people who were still alive down there. Detective Chen authorized an extended search of the deepest sections of the cave system. The team used thermal imaging equipment to look for signs of living people in areas they couldn't physically access. The thermal imaging revealed heat signatures in parts of the cave system that were too deep and too dangerous for the exploration team to reach. The signatures appeared to be human-sized, and some showed movement patterns consistent with living people. There are people alive down there, the thermal imaging specialist reported. We can't tell how many, but the signatures suggest at least 3 or 4 individuals in the deepest sections of the caves. The discovery raised impossible ethical questions. If there were people alive in the glacier caves, how long had they been there? Were they survivors from recent disappearances? Or had some people been living in the caves for years, even decades? And if they were still alive, why hadn't they tried to escape? Dr. Rodriguez theorized that the people living in the deep caves might have adapted to the extreme environment over time. Extended exposure to sub-zero temperatures can cause psychological changes, she explained. People might lose the desire or ability to leave the environment they've adapted to. But Detective Chen suspected something more sinister. The organized arrangement of belongings, the carved passages, the apparent long-term habitation of the caves, it all suggested that the disappearances weren't random accidents. Someone is controlling access to these caves, Chen told the investigation team. Someone is deliberately trapping people down there, or at least preventing them from leaving. The theory led to a disturbing conclusion. The Sapphire Glacier cave system might not just be a natural death trap. It might be something much worse. In December 2023, the investigation took another shocking turn. Park rangers conducting a routine patrol found a camp near the entrance to the glacier caves. The camp was recent, less than a week old, and belonged to someone who wasn't registered for any backcountry permits. Inside the tent, rangers found maps of the glacier cave system that were far more detailed than anything the official investigation team had created. The maps showed passages and chambers that the exploration team hadn't discovered, marked with notes about water sources, safe sleeping areas, and what appeared to be escape routes. Most disturbing was a logbook found in the camp. The logbook contained entries describing dozens of people who had entered the glacier caves over the past several years. Some entries noted when people went missing. Others tracked their movements through the cave system. The final entry in the logbook was dated just 3 days before the camp was discovered. New group entered yesterday. 2 college students from Boulder. They're not prepared for the deep caves, but they'll learn or they won't. Added their gear to the collection. The others will be pleased. The logbook was signed with a single initial, M. Detective Chen immediately realized they weren't dealing with accidental disappearances. Someone was actively monitoring and potentially orchestrating the disappearances at Sapphire Glacier. A manhunt was launched for the person or persons responsible for maintaining the camp. But the perpetrator seemed to have vanished as completely as the people who had disappeared in the glacier caves. The investigation expanded to include FBI agents specializing in serial crimes. The case was reclassified from missing persons to potential homicide, with Sarah and Mike's deaths now viewed as part of a larger pattern of criminal activity. But even as the investigation intensified, the glacier continued to reveal its secrets. Every week brought new discoveries, more personal belongings, more journals, more evidence of people who had vanished into the ice over the decades. The most recent discovery was also the most personal for Detective Chen. In January 2024, rangers found her Aunt Jennifer's geology equipment embedded in the ice. Along with the equipment was Jennifer's research notebook, perfectly preserved after nearly 50 years in the glacier. Jennifer's final entry provided a crucial clue about what was really happening in the Sapphire Glacier caves. The ice isn't natural. Someone is controlling it, using geothermal manipulation to create and modify the cave system. The passages change deliberately. I think someone is using the glacier as a trap, collecting people for reasons I can't understand. If I don't make it out, I hope someone finds this and understands what's really happening here. The notebook included sketches of mechanical equipment that Jennifer had apparently found deep in the caves, equipment that looked far too advanced for 1976 technology. Dr. Rodriguez examined Jennifer's sketches and made a startling conclusion. These drawings show a sophisticated understanding of glacial engineering. Someone has been deliberately modifying this glacier for decades, possibly much longer. The investigation was now focused on finding who had been controlling the Sapphire Glacier cave system and why they had been collecting people who ventured too close to their underground operation. But as winter settled over the Rocky Mountains and the glacier caves became inaccessible for several months, investigators realized they were running out of time. Climate change was accelerating the melting of Sapphire Glacier, and if the ice continued to melt at its current rate, whatever was hidden in the deepest sections of the caves might be lost forever. The mystery of Sarah and Mike's disappearance had evolved into something much larger and more sinister than anyone had imagined. What had started as a tragic hiking accident was now clearly part of a decades-long pattern of disappearances orchestrated by someone who had turned a glacier into the perfect trap. And somewhere in the frozen depths of Sapphire Glacier, that someone was still waiting. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. In March 2024, as spring began to melt the outer layers of the glacier, a park maintenance worker found something that had been overlooked during the intensive searches of the previous year. Carved into a boulder near the main glacier entrance was a symbol that matched drawings found in Jennifer Chen's 1976 research notebook. Below the symbol was a date, April 15, 1952, and below that, barely visible after decades of weathering, were the words, "The collection begins." Detective Chen realized they weren't just dealing with a serial killer who used the glacier as a hunting ground. They were confronting something that had been operating for over 70 years. A systematic collection of human beings that had started long before anyone realized what was happening. The glacier had been more than a tomb. It had been a carefully designed prison, operated by someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of making people disappear without a trace. But as investigators prepared for another assault on the deep caves, Sapphire Glacier began to collapse. The accelerated melting caused by unusually warm spring temperatures destabilized the entire ice structure. Within weeks, the elaborate cave system that had hidden its secrets for so long began to crumble. Whatever truth lay buried in the deepest sections of the glacier was about to be lost forever.